Good morning. Thank you all for putting aside the hackathon projects for right now. And welcome to what we're calling Islandora for Metadata Librarians. This presentation is a growth out of the work that Rosie and myself and Paige Morvitt have been doing with the metadata interest group over the past year. And what do you want to talk about? Well, I'm hoping to talk about a bunch of different things. These are actions that I associate with what a metadata librarian or content creator would want to be doing with Islandora. So managing your schema, creating, ingesting your metadata, editing your metadata, displaying your metadata, etc. This is a very aspirational list, and I feel that there are some slides towards the end that we will definitely not get to today, but we're trying to organize it in a way that will get the things as it gets slowly more and more complex. So we're going to start off with managing your metadata schema. And just to briefly hit the concepts that I know Krista hit yesterday and that have been a part of a lot of presentations. We're looking at the vocabulary, and there is the Drupal node, which is an item of content on Drupal site. And then there's different content types of Drupal nodes, one of which is the repository item content type, which is what Islandora has put together. And that includes a set of metadata fields. And those fields are what we're going to be talking about. And then there's also taxonomies, which are another entity type of kind of Drupal node within Drupal, which you use for controlled vocabularies, and those terms also have metadata fields. So there's metadata fields all over the place, and we're going to be trying to touch on all of those. So yeah, the difference between i7 and Islandora Modern is that we've moved on from metadata in a mods XML data stream. Now the metadata is part of the Drupal database. The metadata is directly attached to the node instead of being another item which is attached. And the metadata is made up of Drupal field types, and those field types define what type of information can go into a field. So we have to have a certain amount of understanding of Drupal field types before we know what we can do with those metadata fields and how we can create new ones, especially since Drupal field types can't be changed once a field has been created. If you create a field that you've created as an EDTF, but you want to use it to put an abstract in, you have to delete that field and create a new one and migrate over any data that you might have been working with. And we're going to be focusing on the metadata fields in the Islandora starter site, just because that is what is available for out-of-the-box deployment. And it has a set of metadata fields that are based on the mods fields that we've been using in Islandora 7, as well as having a set of taxonomies that those fields can use. But to point out, the metadata fields in starter site are not mods. They are based on mods. They are reminiscent of mods so that your data can migrate over intelligently, but they do differ in many ways. So one example is title fields. And the starter site, there are 3 title fields. There's the main title field, which is sort of an administrative field. It is the node title. It is limited to 255 characters. Although that can be changed with a module, but out of the box, 255 characters. And then there's 2 supplementary fields, a full title, which can have more than 255 characters so that you can put your longer titles in there as backup to the node title, and also an alternative title, also more than 255 characters. But those are the only mods title types that exist in the starter site. And so no abbreviated, translated, etc., and no sub-elements like subtitle, non-sort, part number, although we will talk a little bit about some alternative approaches to making up for those lacks. One of the other things that's missing that you would have enjoyed in mods XML is attributes, like the type attribute. And that was what could turn a mods identifier field into multiple different types of identifiers. And Starter Site has a few, main identifier, ISBN, local identifier, and OCLC number, and then a couple of classification fields, similar to the identifier field, also distinguished by type. Another field, as an example, the note field, which has numerous types based on mod's note types, but the Starter Site has a single notes field. So if you want to distinguish administrative or conservation history, you need to do a little bit of extra work. And then there's lots of other attributes that continue to add shades to fields which may not exist in the Starter Site. And just a little examples of some other fields that don't have a Starter Site equivalent. Physical description is one of the elements with sub-elements like reformatting quality, internet media type, digital origin. Those don't have an equivalent, although some of those are taken into account with the technical metadata, so maybe you don't need a separate internet media type field. There's no real field to reproduce related item or any of its sub-elements. The same with part or any of its sub-elements. And then some of the faceted subject fields, if you want to have individual fields for those facets, you would have to do something different. And one thing of note, the key date attribute, which can be used to distinguish specific dates for sorting purposes, there's no equivalent there. So you have your separate date fields, but if you wanted a separate key date field, again, you might have to create something on your own. But there's no reason you can't create something on your own, because this is the Starter Site, and Starter Site metadata fields are starter. So you can do whatever you want. You are not even stuck to the mod's schema, because unlike i7, which actually validated the mod's XML you were writing, there is nothing specifically connecting the fields in modern with a specific schema. So add whatever you want from any schema or make up your own. But you do need to understand those Drupal fields that I was talking about and how they're going to work with your data, because there are decisions you have to make consciously while setting up your database before you start adding metadata, because some decisions cannot be changed after the fact. So just not going to touch on all Drupal field types, but touch on a few of the most commonly used ones. There are three different types of text fields. There is text plain, which has a maximum of 255 characters. Starter Site uses that for things like identifier and alternative title and extent. There is text plain long, which can have more than 255 characters. I believe the spec is a maximum of 44 gigabytes, which is a lot of data. And that's used for the full title field and the description field. And then there's also text formatted long, which is like the previous, but allows HTML formatting. And you can see that in the note field, contents, and abstract. And already there, you can see some decisions that have been made which may not meet the needs of your institution. Maybe you need formatted in a description field, or maybe you don't want formatted at all, so you don't want it in your note field or your abstract. So you may need to create your own alternative to some of those fields. And then one of my favorite fields is the entity reference field, because that connects to the taxonomies. So that gives you the ability to have some sort of controlled vocabulary that you can manage throughout the collection. You can make dynamic changes to the information in your records by controlling the taxonomy. But, for example, you can't have a text field and then suddenly decide you want to make it an entity reference field. You would again have to create a new field. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to manage those things in that way. And then there's the typed relation field, which we use for the linked agent, but which can also be used for other types of fields. It's a type of entity reference field because it's linked to a taxonomy in the linked agent field, corporate body, family, and person taxonomies. But it also lets you assign a relator term for that role list, which allows you to have a single field like linked agent reproduce what in mods, what you might otherwise have to have as a separate author field or a separate illustrator field or a separate donor field. All of those can be handled by linked agents. And it also takes the place of the publisher field, because publisher is one of the roles that you can attach to the value. Maybe you want a separate publisher field that isn't necessarily connected to a vocabulary or isn't grouped with the names of other creators. And then there's the EDTF, which has been talked about a couple of times this week so far. That is a date format field. Got a link to the actual standards up there and some examples along the left-hand side, because of what it lets you do is it lets you add, similar to ISO 8601, but then you can say date approximate or date grouping. So you can code it for seasons or quarters. And what I said, field types do validate to the type of data they allow. So an EDTF field will not accept anything other than validate EDTF. And then you have control over how those values are displayed, which we'll touch on a little bit later. So this is the start of one of the faux demos. So we'll just be doing some screenshots for this in talking about managing fields. So I've got there the sort of steps that you have to go through to get to where you can manage fields for the repository item. It's just go to structure, content type, select repository item, and then select the manage fields option. And this screenshot here is the top options on the main manage fields page for the genre term, taxonomy. You can see here, you've got the label, which is a required field, but which you can change. So if for whatever reason you want to call genre something different, or you want to call linked agents something different, you can make that change and it won't affect the database machine name for the field, but you have some control over that. You can also add help text, which would appear on the metadata form. You can see here, there is a spot to make a field required. Out of the box, I believe title and Islandora content type are the only two that are required. Resource type used to be required, but that has recently changed in the starter site. But if you want to make resource type or any field required, you can just check that box, and that's something that you can change after you have set up your database. And you can also see here on the bottom, there are ways of making a field only accessible by people with certain permissions. And then these are fields that you would see specifically for taxonomy fields. So the first one right up here is create reference entities if they don't always exist. So you can set a vocabulary so that the only way it can be added to is someone going in and editing the vocabulary itself. The other option with this item checked is that if you are cataloging on a metadata form within the repository, you can add terms on the fly. It will look up. If it doesn't see the term in the repository, it will add it, which is very useful for more open workflows, but can lead to typos or, lots of things can go wrong with an autocomplete. Then below that, you'll see the vocabularies, and this will list all the taxonomies that are available to you, and you can select one or more vocabularies to connect to that field. So by default, this was connected to the genre field, but as an example, I could connect it to the family taxonomy if I wanted to. And if I do connect it to more than one, then this store new items in option shows up, and that is where I select which one I would want new terms created into. So if I did have genre and family connected to the genre field, and I wanted to be able to add new terms in it, with this setting, those new terms would be added to the family taxonomy rather than the genre taxonomy. The other settings, and these are some that you won't necessarily be able to change after the fact. These are under field settings in the edit fields. One of them, I won't talk about too much, the type of item to reference. This is because entity reference fields can refer to a lot of different types of entity in Drupal. The main one we use is referring to taxonomy terms. But beneath that, allowed number of values, this is where you decide if a field is repeatable or not. So unlimited means that it's repeatable and you can add as many values as you want. The other option is limited, which has a default of 1. And that's a setting you want to decide on beforehand, because the screenshot on the right is an example of trying to change that function after data has entered the repository. So here I wanted to change it back down to limited from unlimited. There was already records that had 2 genre terms in it, so it's not letting me. If I clean those up, then it would probably let me take it down to limited. And you can see here, you don't just have the option to change it to limited to 1 value. If you wanted to give it a limit of 10 values, you could do that. If you wanted to say, control the number of subject headings someone was allowed to add to a record. I'm going to skip this demo in order to have some time to some of the others. We'll show how to change, but this is sort of the steps you would want to take if you were adding a field. And we'll be adding fields to some taxonomies, so we'll see something similar to this. But it's basically, you go to the repository item, manage fields, then you add a field, and then you start to which Drupal field type it is, give it a name. In this case, it was going to be an entity reference field, but I was going to link to a taxonomy that I added specifically for this purpose. But I will let you all play with the starter site on your own to do that. And then there's a concept that's not a part of the starter site, but which with Discovery Garden we work with, and some other institutions are doing some work with it or have been exploring it, and that's paragraphs. And paragraphs are similar to taxonomies in that they're another type of entity within Drupal, and they can also have metadata fields. So what they allow you to do is group a set of metadata fields together that then can be added through the link of the paragraph type to your main repository item type. So they would link similar to the taxonomies, but you could have multiple fields within there. They actually are a unique type of Drupal field type entity reference, because here with the revisions, when you make changes on the metadata form to inside of a paragraph, it will update that paragraph, but it will also record that the repository item node has been updated, which is useful for keeping track of what changes are happening. So I wanted to show 2 different examples of how paragraphs can be used. One of the things that we have at Discovery Garden is a title paragraph. We have the regular Drupal title field, but beyond that is a paragraph that has 2 fields. It has a title type field, which has a list of the values for different types of titles within mods, and then a separate title field. And this is repeatable, so you can give your main title, you can give an alternative title, you can give a translated title, you can give as many alternative titles as you might want. The way the setup is here, you also have to record a main title as well, so that's a little bit of information duplication, but this allows you to add all of those variants to title. And this is the way it looks on the metadata form there. You can see the field for the title value, and then a drop down where you would select either none if it's just the main title, or alternative, etc. And that's the way we have it appearing on the metadata display. You can see the main title there, and then the one. Now, the University of Arizona actually has a title paragraph as well, although they use it for different purposes. They use it to create complex titles. So they use it for the sub-elements like non-sort or subtitle, and they also use it to be able to record whether a title is supplied or not, which is one of the attributes to title info. And again, actually I don't know if it's repeatable on their site, because I just have this lovely screenshot that Seth shared with me. And then they do some behind-the-scenes stuff which records that information into the Drupal node title. So it goes in here, it comes there, and then for display purposes, it combines some of these fields. So it's just some things that you can do to expand on what's what's there, some other things here that Discovery Garden uses it for, mostly for groups of elements that would have type or be repeatable, like origin information or part or record info. This is how we're able to bring in related item. Also use it as a solution for doing some sorts of faceted subject headings, like hierographical geographic, so that you can go down continent, et cetera, and make the chain. But this is not a part of a starter site. Lots of institutions have looked at it. Some of them have decided to play with it. Some of them have decided not to, and there's a variety of reasons for that. Currently, Workbench doesn't work with paragraphs, but University of Arizona has already put in a pull request to take care of their use case for it. And Discovery Garden has an alternative spreadsheet ingest, which we use to take care of the paragraphs that we include in our default site. Some of it's just using. Yep.
Just an update on paragraphs support in Workbench. I merged sets pull request, but it's undocumented.
Gotcha.
It's incomplete because we need to have the check none. I'll do that.
Okay.
Just to validate values that are identified in the CSV as paragraph values. But once that's done, I'll document it and announce to the Workbench user community that it's ready for use.
That's great. Okay, and just for the recording, Mark Jordan says that this pull request has been merged. We just need to add documentation and some further checks to make sure it's going to work before it goes into general use. So progress is being made there. There are other reasons that some institutions haven't wanted to work with it. Whether or not it works with RDF would involve some development time. It can add complexity to the metadata form. And one thing that I always think of, especially with the notes field, if I wanted to have an administrative note that I wanted only to show to administrators, if I used the note paragraph and selected admin as the note type, I couldn't control whether that specific field would work. So I would want to create a separate administrative note field that worked outside of the paragraph. But it's still something that's interesting, that's a part of Drupal, and that can be used to extend what we're doing. So next topic, wanting to talk a little bit about creating and ingesting your metadata. So I'm not going to go too much over this, but there are two paths to get to edit a single item through the user interface. You can either go to the content page and click the add content button and then choose repository item, and it will give you the metadata form. Also, if you just want to edit an existing node, you go to that node's page, and the menu bar at the top, one of the options will be edit, and that will take you to the metadata form for that specific node. So I just wanted to show you some of the aspects of the metadata form, and then show you a little bit how you can edit that form for your purposes. The top little screenshot here shows an example of the required fields. They get a little red asterisk next to them. They're both right at the top, so you know these are the fields that you have to record, otherwise it won't save. And then down here is a shot of the linked agent field. So you can see there is an add another item, so you can keep adding linked agents. You see the example at the top where it says publisher. That's the drop-down that would list all of the related fields that you have. And then it is an autocomplete field, so it will start to look up as you type that value in your vocabulary. And then if you will add the term when you save that record. So yeah, let's take a look at the metadata form. Let's see if my links work. Yay. So here we go. This is the metadata form. You would get to this by going through structure to content types, then selecting repository item, and you get a series of little tabs up top. The specific one we're looking at right now is Manage Form Display. Manage Fields is where you would go to make changes to the fields. We may be touching on that in a little bit, and we'll also touch on Manage Display. But Manage Form Display is where you go to make edits to that form. And you can see we've got our fields here. There are certain things that we can control So like the title field is actually let me look at the full title field here, is a text area with multiple rows, and if I click on the gear on the left hand side, I can edit how many rows it's showing me on the form to make it easier to add in long bits of data. You can see that there's little field groups, so required and relationships. Those are just text headings, and you can put, it's hierarchical, so you can put a field underneath that, and it will show that way on the form. And we've got the little X's next to it, so you can go around and change the order of the fields as they appear on the page. It also lets you, it'll show row weights, so if you want to change that stuff numerically, you can do it rather than dragging, because sometimes there's a lot of field here. Here we got our date fields, again, the date widget, so different types of fields will have different widgets on how you can display. And changing rows, and let me look at a taxonomy field real quick. There we go, subject. There's some options that you have here. You can control how many results it gives you as it autocompletes. You can change to whether the autocomplete is looking at the beginning of a term with starts with, or whether it's just looking for that term anywhere in the field, and then do some other changes in text fields. So you've got some ways to customize the way the way your form will look and feel. And then the other thing I want to show you is down at the bottom, the land of disabled fields. So if you've got a field that for whatever reason you don't want to appear on the form, maybe it was one of the starter site fields that you're not using, or maybe I've seen this use case, there was data coming in during a migration, but you never want people to change that. It's just there for recording purposes. So if you drag a field and move it down to disabled, that's all you have to do. It will no longer show on the form. It doesn't delete the field, but it hides it for now. So that way you can also bring some of those defaults back when you need it later on. And if I hit save, it will save my choices and make that difference. Creating and ingesting your metadata. Ingesting metadata with Islandora Workbench. We won't talk about that today because we could do an entire day on everything involved with metadata. But Mark gave a lovely presentation yesterday, and there is great documentation online. We will touch on some aspects of this once we get to Rosie's portion a little bit later. But I want to talk about managing your vocabularies in taxonomies. So the nice thing we talked about is that taxonomies have metadata fields. So this is an example of the person taxonomy. And you've got the main term, the name that is what you have, but you can also record, it is not required, a variety of more information about that name. So by default, the starter site has alternate name. It's got authority sources where you would record the URI, connecting it to an authority, birth date, death date, and relationships, which would let you provide the relations between that name and other names or corporate bodies, etc. It is not necessarily information that is being used by the site right now, although authority sources, the URI does become a part of the RDF, and relationships is something that could be managed with some work, and all of this can be used and converted in various ways. But authority source is the main thing that gets used in most vocabularies. So let's add a field. I'm going to add a field for the mark code to language taxonomy. So to get to the taxonomies, I go to structure, and this time I choose taxonomy instead of content type. And I want to go down. This is all the taxonomies that we have. And there is my language. And it talks about using ISO 639-2. So if I click list terms, then it shows the terms that I've got so far. And if I click on Manage Fields, it shows that the only metadata field as a part of this taxonomy is authority sources. So if I want to add a field, I'll click Add Field. I'll choose the field type from here. So in this case, you can see there's all sorts of options there. Oops. I'm going to go for text plain because I want to use those codes, which are just 3 characters long. I can add a label here. I'm going to add mark code. And as you can see, it will automatically generate the machine name, but you can edit that yourself if you want it to be something different. And as I said, you can go back and change the label, but the machine name will stay the same. So I'll click Save and Continue. And then here is where I make that one choice. So it was a text plain, which means it can only have a maximum of 255 characters, but if I wanted to have a maximum of 20, I can change that there, and it will enforce that. This is also where I would decide whether something was limited or unlimited. Again, if for this field, there is only one mark code equivalent per language, so I would leave it as limited. And then I can add help text, make it required, etc. if I want to, but I will just save the settings. And now I've got the mark code there, so if I go into my list and decide I want to edit English, it's going to stick it down here at the bottom because I would have to make some edits to the way the form is displayed here. But there's my mark code, and if I add in ENG and click Save, that is now a part of that vocabulary term and could be used for purposes if you were going to have some way of translating your records into mark, for example, and you wanted to have that term. There we go. Okay. I won't go through this demo, but I will show you. So the other thing you can do is add authorities. By default, some of the taxonomies will have at least one, maybe 2, because other always appears there. But just taking a look at the genre one again, if I look at Manage Fields, there's my authority sources. And if I click Edit, down here, here's the list of authority sources that are connected to this taxonomy. If I wanted to add, the example I have is the Getty Art and Architecture Thesaurus, I would just add it in here, and what it wants is the code for it, and this is what the database uses. That's what's being recorded, and then a pipe, and then the language. And I'm going to keep all of those typos in. So if I hit Save, now when I go to edit a term, authority sources, there's my Getty Art and Architecture Thesaurus. And then one other thing I wanted to show was subject terms for that. So the example, yeah, I've got a lot. Of Rom the Space Knight. So if I want to edit that, I will go into my subject taxonomy to list terms. I can go down and edit this term and remove fictitious characters, so it is just X-Men. And save it. Refresh this page. That it won't do. So in this one, I have 2 different variants on action figures toys. And if I go into subject and I say, well, this one's wrong, I want to add the parentheses to it because this is the way it is. And Tinybug, which is Drupal's fault, in terms using the metadata form, it won't accept parentheses. You can go back in and add the parentheses, but at the time you have to leave them out or else it will reject it. Minor problem. But I may have made that change, but they're still separate fields, and they still both show up on my record. And that's where we come to term merge. This is a fairly recent addition to Starter Site. Okay, we're good. It is a part of the Taxonomy Manager module. And at its basis, when you go to the Taxonomy Management module, it just gives you a different interface to manage some of your taxonomies, to add terms, etc. But the really nice thing it does is it adds a merge tab to the taxonomy page, which lets you merge two terms together, two or more terms together. So here is my list of creators that I have here. And damn it, I have 3 variations of my own name. And I want to use Daychris. I want to use the less formal one. And I want to merge these 2 terms into it. So if I go up here, there is now a merge tab that I can see on my taxonomy. So if I click that, first it asks me the terms to merge. And that can mean 2 different things depending on what you want to do. So what I want to do right now is just take Daychrist, which is an abbreviation of it, and Daychristopher, and I want to merge those into Daychris. So if I click merge here, I can either create a new term that I will merge those 2 fields into, or select from the existing ones and say I want to merge them into Daychris, and then click submit, and then confirm the merge, and now I just have Daychris. And that's great, but it doesn't actually work the way you want it to with linked agents. You know, it's a fun way of doing it, but if you have those terms applied to an object, they'll have a role next to them, and it doesn't actually update them. When I have tried it in the past with linked agents, and you know, we always say, don't use it for linked agents. I don't know why I used it as the example here. I realized that when I got to that point. When I've tried it, I go to the record, and both of the appearances of the term have disappeared, but their roles are still there, and the merge term has not appeared to replace them. But you can use it for any of the other vocabularies to do a lot of things which are very useful, because you can do cleanup after a migration, where you've got all those variations because there's no controlled vocabulary before. You can fix typos that it could appear with an autocomplete, because if you start typing a word and you get ahead of yourself and you hit return and it hasn't actually connected to the term in the vocabulary, then you've got something. You can use it to consolidate vocabulary, and you don't have to touch each digital object that that term has been applied to. It does not work with linked agents, just like we said, and you can only merge within a single taxonomy. So if I have a term in my subject taxonomy, be in my geographic subject taxonomy, move it with the term merge terms within the field. So we've come, and as far as editing your metadata 1 record at a time, you use the metadata form that we looked at before. So I'm not going to go back over that, but what I'm going to do is turn it over to Rosie to talk about batch editing.
All right, so batch editing is obviously one of the things that Drupal offers us a lot of different ways of doing that. The first strategy that I'm going to show you itself, and it uses views bulk. And then the second option is going to be a way to export your data to CSV so that you can modify the CSV and then re-import it en masse. So with views bulk edit, the GUI This is a separate module that's required. Views bulk edit also requires the module called views bulk operations. And you can install those on your site in the usual way. They're not in the starter site right now, but they should be, so I'll be putting them in pretty soon. And you basically get to set yourself up a view and use all of View's power to search for the things that you want to change. And then you can select them and click Actions, Edit Content. So I have a live demo here. So you can even just do this with the basic content view. So here's my main content page. I can select off a few of these objects that are in there, and under the Action menu, I want Edit Content. So this option only appears if you've got Views Bulk Edit. And so Apply to Selected Items allows you to select all sorts of different fields that you could be wanting to update. So I selected off Table of Contents, and I could add some text here. I don't have as good of an example as Chris did, but I'll just put some text into the Table of Contents. And then an important option is, what is the method of changing this? So you can either replace all the existing table of content data for these objects with my new value, or append it to the current value. And I believe that append means it's a multi-valued field, so you just get another value. So if you can have multiple tables of contents, this would be, an additional one. So I can confirm, and then congrats, we have now updated these, and if I went into there, I would see my table of contents value. Now, that is cool, but it is also limited. The only thing that it does is we'll set, I just set the same demo text as the table of contents for two separate objects, but they obviously, in reality, have very different tables of contents, so you wouldn't be able to do that with Views Bulk Edit. And another thing that you can't do with it is if you have multiple, say multiple subjects, and you want to change all values of a certain one to a different one, you can't do that with Views Bulk Edit, because it will either, like as we saw before, you can either replace all the existing values with what we've got here, or append this new value to an existing list. There's no way to laser hone in on the one that you want changed and change just that one. So that's for multi-valued fields, which would lead us to batch editing using an export, edit, and import method. So this is, I think, fairly new to Islandora Workbench, but there is a get data from view task. There are a few tasks that are kind of lumped under the creating CSVs. So if you go to the documentation, it's under the section for generating CSV files. And it is down here, using a Drupal view to identify content to export as CSV. And so here's the sample Workbench configuration that you could use for that. And notice that the task is this get data from view. So what that implies is that you actually need to create yourself a view. And the Workbench documentation explains all of this. But you set it up as a serializer format. So first you have to create a REST export display. So when you click add here, you can make a page, you can make a block, or you can make a REST export. And that's the one that you want. And so then set it up as serializer with JSON as the accepted style option. Set it up with a path. This is really important. It won't let you save without a path, so I just called it Workbench Export. And then I gave it some authentication options. Basic auth is the real important one that Workbench uses to authenticate to that. And if you don't put basic auth here, you won't be able to complete the transaction. And then set up a little pager so that Workbench can get all the objects in batches. And so the great thing about using this Workbench export view is it gets all the fields. I ran it, and then I uploaded it into Google Sheets. And you can see all of my first column is node ID. That's fantastic. That's the Drupal node. The second column is title, and then we start going into all of our fields. And we go all the way down to This way you're not missing anything. So this is a very thorough export of all the metadata that you've got in your site right now. And that is a really good thing if you're wanting to be changing some metadata and then re-uploading it. So if, for instance, I wanted to edit some of the titles here, change some of the rights, I could do that here, delete any of the columns that I don't need, and then with the node ID column in place, it's ready for a workbench update task. And so it'll update each of those nodes with whatever info you need. And I would probably go in and delete any rows that I'm not actually going to edit in bulk, just to save, I don't know, useless writing and versioning. I will delete all of these things except the collections, and I'll bulk rename the collections. So I'm renaming all of my collections to awesome binary collection, awesome video collection. And I'm also going to I keep on confusing rows and columns that we don't need. So delete those. And now we've got just a very simple CSV, node ID and title. Workbench import.csv. And I guess I'll put it in downloads. So I should probably be more organized and have a real directory that I'm operating from, but I'll just go to downloads. And I'll make a very basic workbench config file here. Task. Host. And I'm trying to remember if there's any more required fields for this part, but let's just.
Replace value.
Oh, yeah.
Probably replace. And I think that's default.
Okay. Just.
Replace is the default, so you don't need to add.
Oh, right. So the update mode is the one that I could have added as well. Okay.
Just a note while you're doing that, Rosie.
Yep.
Just like views, bulk operations couldn't single out a specific value in a multi-value field.
Right.
You can workbench.
Right.
So you would need to change that in your CSV.
So I guess I should have actually done a better example. That's a really good point. Thank you. What I would have done is gone to that field that contained multiple values. And within that one column, they would be separated out with some delimiter, probably a pipe. And then I would have to use my regular expressions or what have you to single out the specific instances of the term that or the text that I wanted to change and change it to something else. And then I'd need to keep all those like multiple values in the column. I wouldn't be able to delete those because once we go into Workbench, we'd be replacing those values. So making sure that the other ones are still there is important. Input dir, input CSV. All right, live hacking here. Config equals no config.yum. is it data dir or input dir that I'm
Input here.
input dir? Thank you. Somehow I've screwed up my admin user, but admin2 was one that I created just before this. All right, so okay, connection to Drupal is going, update task started, and node 15 through 6 have been updated. So we can go into the back to my site. And all my collection titles have been changed. Yay! So yeah, you'd need to do some CSV shenanigans in order to, carefully replace individual values in a multi-valued field that you need to change. But that is definitely possible using, tools like Google or using its like macros, using OpenRefine, using Python, what have you. So that was our live demo. And now I'm going to pass it back to Chris.
So yeah, talking a little bit about displaying your metadata. So again, mostly do this with some screenshots here. I showed you where the manage display tab was on the repository item type. And just a few things that you can see here. Again, you can drag to reorder the fields. So right now, these are the fields. We've got these fields, but I could easily drag it so linked agent was above title on my display. You also can add field groups, just like you were doing in the metadata form display. And the one other thing to show you here up top is there are 3 different view types for this right now out of the box. There is default, which is what you edit. That is what by default is shown as the metadata display. But there are also 2 teaser and search results highlighting input. Those are view types, and they can be used for different purposes. And they also prove the existence that you can create your own view types for various purposes. I'm not going to go into that right now, but it is a Drupal thing that is available to you potentially for some customization. One of the things, this is where I said I was going to talk a little bit about the EDTF date formatter. This is something that you do on the managed display. It has 5 different ways of adjusting how your EDTF date is going to be displayed. And just as examples, one of them is dash separator. So that is whether it's a dash or a slash or a dot or a space that is between the year, month, and date. Date order, I love the names of these things. So big endian, I guess, starts with the biggest number, which is the year, and then will display the month and the date. Little is date, month, year, and middle is month, date, year. And the 3 that you are seeing there are all with space as the date separator because it is using the words for the month, which is one of the other things that you can change. So it can be a 2-digit month, it can be a 1-digit month, it can be an abbreviation of the month like Feb, or it can be the full month like February. And that's one of the things. The month format also affects if you are using things like season or quarter. If you have it spelled out to have the full month, that is when it will say spring 1984 as opposed to 1984-34, which is something that is confusing. Day format, you can choose whether it's 2 digits or 1, and year format, you can have be 4 digits or 2. And just like the metadata form, you also have your disabled fields here. So this can be where your unneeded fields go for, and this can also go, like we were saying, if you have fields that you want to record but don't want to display at all, then you would move it down to disabled. It doesn't delete it, it just makes it unavailable. You can also change the permissions for a specific field. So if it was something that you wanted only to show to certain levels of access, you can make that change as opposed to disabling it. Now I'm going to turn it back to Rosie for indexing and searching your metadata.
So another really important part where your metadata comes up, obviously, is when you want to search your site. And the Drupal module search API is what we're using. It is really, really well used and downloaded and loved, and works very well. It's kind of a middleware layer between us, the Drupal database, and then whatever our backend search is. So Search API is a generic module. It can work with Solr. We have Drupal provides developed thing. It also lets you make facets, and it has features like search highlighting. So I want to go a little bit, because we talked so much about all these fields that are Drupal fields. I wanted to make it clear that when we're talking about search fields, this is a separate beast altogether. You make your Drupal fields, and then you could potentially make equivalent search fields for each of them, but you don't have to, and they work differently and they have different types. So the Drupal fields that we've been talking about so far are defined by are enabled, or you can make them because of Drupal core. You go to admin structure content types and you manage your fields there. The Drupal field types we've seen are those like text formatted long, text plain, image, file, typed relation, EDTF, and those last ones are ones that are provided by Islandora. And as I'm pretty sure you know, you can use views with all these Drupal fields. So pulling up your entity reference field, displaying the entity in some way, or fields on that entity or something. But however, using it in views requires Drupal to load up the entity in order to get the data out. And when you're doing that at scale, it can be very heavy. So on the other hand, search fields are defined by the Search API module. You manage them in a different place at admin config search API. And their types are things like full text, string, date, integer, boolean, and a whole number of like full text n-grams, full text excluding certain things. Those are really like complex and nerdy search ways of dealing with like text processing. I'm not going to go into them because I don't know enough about it. But search fields can also be used in views. So especially if you're making a Solr, like a search API view, when you are populating the fields for that view, these are the ones that say indexed field. So yeah, this is what your Drupal fields management interface looks like, and this is what the search field management interface looks like. Different fields there of different types. So a full text field is the first one. It's an aggregated field, and then EDTF year is an integer, a Drupal field. So we can take our abstract and make that into a search field. But it can also be an Drupal fields. So like we saw an aggregate here, the abstract and description full text field is an amalgamation of your abstract and your description, because in Drupal we have those in two separate places, but sometimes it might be nice to search that as one unit. Search API allows you to manually edit the machine names of your fields, which is a little bit unusual for this kind of thing. And you can see there in the second column, you can edit that. There's also a thing called property path, which is used internally, and it tells it where to get the code that will extract the kind of text out of that field that you want. And you can also change all these types. So right now, when it's set to type full text, you can click the drop down and once you've modified any of these fields, you need to re-index your content, because it's processed and stuck back into Solr in the, with your new fields, with your new field names, all that stuff. So I want to talk about two types of fields in particular. Full text is the first one. As you might intuit, it's best for full text searching. In fact, if you don't have it full text, your full text searching is not really going to work the way you expect. And the reason for this is Solr breaks up words at like word boundaries. It might truncate the endings off of words, and the way that it is stored in the database, it's possible to match if your search string, if like the words are all present but they're in a different order and they're spaced out, it'll still find a match. The query string doesn't have to match exactly, but the better it matches, the closer the document is to your search string, the higher the relevance will be. So Solr is pretty smart in its back end in terms of changing the relevance. This is what the full text filter in views uses. It will search all full text fields. You don't actually need to know too much about these fields if your setup is working okay. You can just use views, say full text search, and it hides a lot of the complexity from you. But as I remember, that full text search will search all the fields that are in your database that are typed full text. And if you're creating a field based on a Drupal field that is a long text field, so our descriptions and our abstracts and our tables of contents, then full text is the default type that it'll be. And so the other type of search field is a string. And this is great for facets, and that is because, it requires the exact match, the string to match completely. So if you have a partial match, if you've indexed, it's the default for things like term names. So if I had my name in there as Lefebvre Rosie, and you typed in Rosie, it would not match on this if it was searching as a string field. But you can also search these using a global search box. One way is to build it yourself using Drupal views and its full text filter option. And that, as I mentioned before, searches all the full text fields. The advanced search module provides a global search box and it appears in two different ways, but it's the same box. And it searches all your fields. So if you do have a string that you want to exactly match that is a string field in your database, you can find it using the advanced search module. There are some other Solr field types like date range, decimal, integer, boolean. Just be careful with these, particularly the date field. Your content needs to be exactly in the format that Solr will allow, or Solr will be very angry with you. I won't talk too much about the rest of this. So if you are creating a view for your search, it'll be faster if you use the search index versions of the fields in your view. That means it's coming directly out of Solr, and it doesn't need to load the Drupal entity in order to find out what those are. And if you want to get your hands really dirty, oh shoot, I don't know what it is. Do you know? It's probably Solr. Solr.islandora.dev. Okay, that looks about right. There we go. If your Solr search is available, you can jump in here. I don't usually use much of this index, except I have to you have to first select a core. Default is the usual one. And then you can click on query. So select a core, click query, and then you've got this great interface. And star is the search phrase that says, just get me everything. So this is what your data look like. And each of these documents is a particular node, pretty much. Because I think we might be indexing nodes and taxonomy terms, but each of those entities in Drupal is represented as a document here in Solr, and you can see the different fields and what their values are. So that's an interesting way to debug. And if you don't have access to this, Mark Jordan has a module called Islandora Whole Object, I believe, that exposes this as a block that you can have on your node so you can see all this data without having to go into the Solr interface itself. All right, now
let's
back to Chris.
Switch.
Okay, so caveat, this is something that I am learning as I go. So Rosie has hopefully stopped me from saying things that are too incorrect, but I might still make some stuff up. So the starter site exposes your metadata as Dublin core and as mods using the REST OAI PMH module. I'm going to touch a little on the Dublin core exposure right now. It uses RDF mappings that you set up to decide which fields go to which Dublin core. I believe it only works with straight Dublin core, not qualified Dublin core. And it would reduce, if you did have a mapping that included qualified Dublin core, it would reduce it to the equivalent straight Dublin core. And then there are views that are a part of the starter site, which actually take that mapping make the page that exposes the OAI-PMH stream. And just to show you what that endpoint looks like, so here is the OAI-PMH stream for the test site that I put together. And you can see we've got our very basic title, description, date, format, type, etc. Fields that are being exposed. But of a DC exposed. There are ways of reconfiguring that mapping if you want. This is where I start to walk into the weeds, so apologies. The Dublin core mappings are configured in the main RDF mapping, which you can find. Oh, it says here, and he's gonna be correcting me. And possible second. You can find this on the site. Administration, configuration, config, development, configuration is where the various mappings are exposed. And the screenshot shows you this is the mapping for the Islandora object. And you can see here from the screenshot a few of the fields like field subject general and field subject. You can see those are being mapped to DC term subject. Field genre being mapped to DC terms type. And these mappings can be exported, edited offline, and then re-imported into the system in order to make some adjustments to those mappings. The RDF mapping takes care of the schemas that your various fields are mapping to. And it's all your fields, all your taxonomy terms, and this report. So this is a report you can get to from reports, field and term RDF mapping. And this is a nice little overshot. It was first shown to me by Paige, who enjoyed it because it gave her a one-stop spot to see all of her taxonomy terms. But it also shows where the various fields that are a part of Islandora for the various object types, where those are linked to. So here we go, our repository items. So we can see here, abstract, field abstract is mapped to DC terms abstract. And further down, we can get to a taxonomy. Those are the different object types. So yeah, here, genre. And I would need to do some adjusting to the mappings to show the URIs here. But it's all stuff that can be changed. So we can see here, it is set up to map those URIs for the names. So there's my LC URIs for David Bowie and Sal Buscema. David Bowie typed in a way that could be edited at some time. So this is a nice report to see, to give you a top-down level view of what you have and you're working with.
Does that report paginate the terms listed? Because we have sites with thousands
Yeah, I
of
do
persons.
not believe it does.
I do not think that would load, that report would load on my
Yeah.
site.
No,
I do that, and I know some of the time. So it would have been a great user-on project would be to get that to paginate, or cabinet or something like that. Yeah.
cool.
I would add.
Yes.
So we don't forget.
Because someone may find out that it's gonna time out before next year.
There's just a place for it, because I moved one from last year to this year.
Let's see. Okay. So the other things the RDF mappings to is it creates a JSON LD file, which can be exposed by simply adding !_format equals JSON LD to the end of any node URL. And this is where you can also, it does certain things out of the box, but you would need to do some updates to it to do things like converting dates from EDTF to ISO, or to make sure that the reference entities are being exposed as a URI. and various other things. Okay, and one final thing that I wanted to show, because the other thing that has recently been added to the starter site is a citation module. This will then expose the metadata and transform it into one of three different, maybe four different types of citation styles. It hits the main ones that are being used for academic purposes, like Chicago style. But let me just show you a little bit about it. So this is the CSL language, and these fields are all adjustable on our demo page. So it is administration, configuration, and then bibliography and citation, and then there are two different pages for this. This first one lets you, here are all the CSL fields that I linked to in that previous link, and then you can assign your Islandora fields to it. So as an example, there is a CSL field for DOI. DOI is not one of the fields that comes in starter site, but I added it for this purpose, so I can go here and see all of my fields, and down here, text plain field DOI. They're grouped by Drupal field type. So if I select that, and then scroll down to the bottom and click Saved Configuration, now I can go to, and I apologize, somehow between Chicago and here, I broke the ability for uploading new images. So this article, you can imagine for this, that there is a PDF here. But I had already added a DOI to it earlier. So if I go down here, here is select citation style. If I choose Chicago Manual of Style, and it didn't display. I broke my starter site. It would then display, and you would see the DOI there. Magic! The other thing to show down here, which is a part of starter site, is you can see the mods and Dublin Core mappings for every record. If I click on the show mods, there's a mods record. This is the XML that is being produced for that purpose. So, yes, successful and unsuccessful demonstrations. That is what could be easily an entire day's workshop on metadata. So I leave it with 2 slides just to follow up. Plug for the metadata interest group. We meet bi-weekly for the most part, although we've been monthly over the summer. Our next meeting will be Monday the 31st, where we'll try to talk about what we all learned at IslandoraCon. When this presentation goes up, there'll be a link to the Zoom link and our most recent meeting minutes. And we always announce it on Slack, and I try to announce it over the listserv, but I've failed quite often.
It's okay. I just wanted to confirm. Our next meeting is July 31st, right? The slide says August.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's July 31st.
Okay.
Thank you. And then we wanted to leave you with some other resources. On the left-hand side are various links to documentation. There's a lovely map with other institutions with Islandora 2.0 and other variations. And on the right-hand side are the projects that sort of led up to this. The top one is the presentation we gave at Islandora Camp. The second one was an edited down version that we gave in a MIG. And the final is this living document where we've been going through a single field in the starter site each week and going sort of in depth. And that's something we're hoping to turn into documentation in the near future, as well as some ideas for additions to the starter site. So, don't believe the food is here, so I have you captive for a few more minutes. So, if you have any questions, please feel free. Yes?
So you're using BibSite. That's cool. I've used it a lot before, but I know it's a huge ecosystem on its own, like kind of as big as Islandora. Are we using, like, in this starter site example, is it using like how kind of strict of a subset are you using just to get the citation format? And does that kind of clutter up your UI, or are you kind of mindful of trying to kind of paring that down?
Do you have any thoughts on that? Uh, I don't know if we have a full comment. We have not mapped. I know that by default, only a handful of fields have been mapped. For instance, publisher doesn't map to it, as I've discovered. So it's definitely something that needs some work.
Mihaela?
I think I might help with that question if I understood it correctly. We're using the same citation module in a different Drupal site, non-Islandora, and we were able to upload our own style that we edited somewhere else in a regular CSL editor, and use that with the mappings that we manage in the Drupal site. I don't know if that answers your question.
It's slightly different, but it's cool. Those two, Islandora and Bibsite working together, I think could be really powerful. So it's cool that other people are using it.
Yeah.
Chris, we have to repeat the comments
Okay.
as possible.
Best we do.
Or just a little hint of what was said.
A little hint.
A little mic that's close to you.
Yes, well, what Mihaela said was they've been using Bibsite on their site as opposed to the installation from the starter site, and it is possible to upload your own citation profiles. So ours comes with 5, and you can create your own. I believe there are various Git sites where people have shared citation formats that they have created, and then you just sort of have to work through it to make sure that you are accounting for the fields that you want to show up. Okay, the food is coming. So another question from Mihaela.
I actually have a couple of questions. Thank you for the great presentation.
She says the presentation was great. Go on, sorry.
Are you guys going to share the slides by any chance?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. I have kind of like a big list of questions that I was just kind of writing down while you were presenting. Kind of like the basic one that has always been on my mind. I didn't get a chance to join the metadata meetings much or at all recently, but I was wondering what's the deal with the related item mods group that has been used quite extensively by some Islandora 7 installations to help describe journal articles and things like that. And if there is any kind of rationale behind it not being included in the default mapping yet.
Sure. So back when we were creating the default repository item metadata profile, as it were, we knew that the related item was going to be a big one, but it is also a very complex one because you can put an entire mods record inside that element. So we know too that what it's usually used for is, as you said, the kinds of citation things where you've got a parent, like a related item type equals host, and then that's the name of the journal and describes the journal and volume issues and all that stuff. What seemed to be the most Drupal-y would be to make that a separate node with its own thing and then link those via an entity relationship somehow. But it also seems very complex to create a brand new hierarchy of entities, because to properly model that, you would model. So my journal, my article, my initial thing is an article. It's within an issue, and that issue is part of a volume, and that volume is part of a publication. And I don't want to make 5 entities for every one journal article that I want to put into my site. That seems insane and just a nightmare to manage. So we left that as let's let the IR group figure this out, essentially. Because we do need to model those kinds of things, but we could model them in a way that's a little, maybe we should model them in a way that's a little easier to use. And maybe we should just use the Bibsite module, because it already has metadata profiles for journal article and everything, and thesis and everything else that we're going to want to use. So I guess it's a really good question. It's kind of the elephant in the room for IR, because we haven't standardized on any one way of doing it. Each way has its pros and cons.
Are you aware of any specific ways people who have already migrated or are in the process of migrating?
I think the easiest thing would be to add like 3 fields to every to the repository item content type, like volume, issue, and publication.
And journal.
Yeah, publication. And so that would be the simplest, but it's not like good modeling, and it's not really robust. And if you so
I can speak to the DGI.
yeah, of course.
Discovery Garden uses a paragraph for that. That's one of the things that we use, especially since that allows you to name the type of related item. But we step aside from the massive entire mods records into it by making it a very simple, just a text field for a title, a text field for extent, and then a URL link field to link to the other item. But as Rosie says, that's also a big part of modeling institutional repositories. So we're having a lot of internal discussions on how that needs to grow to take advantage of the relationships which are specific to institutional repositories.
Which actually brings me to my other questions, but anybody else has?
Yeah, I will say that food is here, so we can break and people can grab food, and Rosie and I will be around during the entire lunch break and happy to talk about anything with anybody. I'm glad to talk about ROM Space Knight, the second best toy-based comic book from the 1970s. But thank you all for your time.